समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
आप समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Does one laugh or does one cry after listening to Donald Trump addressing the United Nations? The one thing that we can agree on, that it's a speech like none other by an American president or any head of state. Trump targeted India among targeting many other nations from the podium at the United Nations. He ranted about his teleprompter, he ranted about the escalator, he ranted about the United Nations itself, he ranted about Russia and Ukraine, and later he met with leaders of the Muslim and Arab world, including Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, and called it his most important meeting. There were some hilarious moments and some outrageous ones, and that's what's come to define Trump. This at a time when Rubio is saying that he hopes to fix things with India on the tariff standoff. But the H-1B visa lottery scheme is all set to end. And there are cries once again on the OPT program, that's a training program for foreign students, to also be brought to an end. Those are voices that we're hearing again in America. Inside Donald Trump's weird day at the United Nations, what's the message to take away for India? I'm Barkha Dutt. You're with the Mojo story. Donald Trump declared once again that he had ended the war between India and Pakistan. He in fact claimed that he had ended 7 wars and nobody said anything nice to him at the UN. He said he got nothing from the UN except a broken escalator and a broken teleprompter. If those were some rather funny moments, there were some pretty weird moments, seriously weird moments as well. Donald Trump at one point spoke about how some countries in Western Europe were all going to go to hell. He seemed to have belatedly discovered that the European Union has been addressing its energy needs in part from sourcing energy from Russia. I mean, didn't he know that all this while? He once again targeted India and China for fueling Russia's war. Zelensky, by the way, has contradicted that by saying India is mostly with us. That's what Zelensky has said on Trump's charge that India is fueling the war. He had a 36-second encounter that you see on your screen with Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif. And later, he met with Shehbaz Sharif along with other leaders of the Muslim and Arab world to talk about the situation in Gaza. From an Indian standpoint, we've had Jaishankar, the foreign minister, meeting with Marco Rubio. We have Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal in the United States of America. The Washington Post is suggesting that India may reduce its purchase of Russian oil, but we have no such independent corroboration and no statement to this effect from the government. In fact, the last recorded statement from India on this is India's envoy to Russia saying India will buy oil wherever it is the best deal for India. Let's introduce our distinguished panel of experts today as we struggle to understand what that address was all about. Chidanand Rajghatta is with us, senior journalist, columnist based out of the United States of America. Chidanand, always a pleasure to see you. Bill Drexel of the Hudson Institute is with us. Bill famously co-wrote an op-ed with Nikki Haley, where at one point Nikki Haley was also urging the Trump administration not to alienate India. Bill was a co-author on that op-ed. Good to see you, Bill. We're also joined by veteran diplomat, Ambassador Dr. Mohan Kumar. It's always a pleasure, sir, to have you. And also welcoming to the program for the first time, I hope the first of many, it's Stanley Johny, International Affairs Editor at The Hindu. I've got to start with my favorite bit of the Trump speech, just because it made me laugh so much. This is Trump complaining that the UN had never even made a phone call to him to say thank you. He ended 7 wars, but all he got was a broken escalator and a broken teleprompter. Before we open up the serious conversation, let's take a look at this clip.
I ended 7 wars, dealt with the leaders of each and every one of these countries and never even received a phone call from the United Nations offering to help in finalizing the deal. All I got from the United Nations was an escalator that on the way up stopped right in the middle. If the First Lady wasn't in great shape, she would have fallen, but she's in great shape. We're both in good shape. We both stood. And then a teleprompter that didn't work. These are the two things I got from the United Nations, a bad escalator and a bad teleprompter. Thank you very much. And by the way, it's working now. Just went on. Thank you. I think I should just do it the other way. It's easier.
I mean, where does one begin? Ambassador Dr. Mohan Kumar, where do we laugh? Do we hold our head? Do we do a bit of both? I mean, this is, I don't know what the polite word is to use for this address. Since you are better at this than me, what is the polite word that you would use, Ambassador Mohan Kumar? Sorry, can we unmute Ambassador Mohan Kumar? Yeah, go ahead, sir.
I think he dissed the United States. Diss is the word I would use. I think
the United Nations, you mean? The United Nations.
Yes, he dissed the United Nations. Yes, sorry. So anyway, I think his views on multilateralism in the United Nations are well known, but I think he has just confirmed those views on the biggest stage in the world, if you like, the United Nations General Assembly. So I think that's one takeaway. But I think the two other important takeaways from me was, one, he said a lot of quotable quotes, actually. One is this: it is time to end the experiment with open borders. So there is that thing about immigration and illegal immigration, but also I think he was hinting that perhaps legal immigration as well has to be tackled. He said carbon footprint is a hoax created by people with evil intentions. Renewable energy is a joke. So you have his views on climate change. I think the problem for the UN was that the United Nations is left doing only two things these days. One is climate change, and the other is sustainable development goals. Everything else has virtually come to a halt anyway. So if you hear him attacking these two issues that the UN deals with, it's very clear that the United States has not only withdrawn from the WTO and everything else, but also the UN. So really, we are all left trying to imagine a world, a multilateral world without the United States. And a lot of people are thinking about it. The WTO minus US, the UN minus US. Problem with the UN, of course, is the US continues to be the largest funder. So all in all, I would say, Barkha, that while this was expected, I think the bluntness with which he articulated those views took people's breath away, with absolutely no room for maneuverability or flexibility. He brought in a personal element by saying, I would have built a better building if you had given me the contract for 500 million. You went and gave it to somebody else, and look, the teleprompter is not working. The escalator stopped halfway. So he combines the personal gripe with his own views on the subject. But as you said in your opening remarks, the one thing that caught my attention, he mentioned India, but he said only 2 weeks ago he learned that the European Union was importing fuel from. That is extraordinary. I mean, it's also an extraordinary admission in all naivety by the president that, listen, I didn't know this. To that extent, I feel India was perhaps left off the hook a little bit. And Zelensky's statement, as you said, was also important. All in all, it was a bit bizarre, Barkha, and that is the only expression I can think of.
For a senior diplomat to say it's a bit bizarre, I'd love to hear your off-record version of this speech. But you know what? You make a really. I'm glad you picked up on that point about how his belated discovery that the EU has been addressing and meeting its energy needs, A, from buying refined petroleum products from India, and B, LNG and so on directly from Russia. I mean, was nobody advising him at the White House? Before I come to everybody else, I just want to play out that clip where he goes for India and he goes for China, but then he makes this bizarre admission that he discovered that EU is sourcing some of its energy from Russia only 2 weeks ago. This is the American president trying to end the Russia-Ukraine war. Take a look.
Now is how many more lives will be needlessly lost on both sides. China and India are the primary funders of the ongoing war by continuing to purchase Russian oil. But inexcusably, even NATO countries have not cut off much Russian energy and Russian energy products, which, as you know, I found out about 2 weeks ago, and I wasn't happy. Think of it. They're funding the war against themselves. Who the hell ever heard of that one?
I mean, who the hell ever heard of that one? Mostly the whole world. Somebody forgot to send the memo to Donald Trump. Bill, I find it tough to sometimes host these programs because I just want to burst out laughing almost every 5 minutes. How does the American president say that he discovered only 2 weeks ago when, like a junior researcher in every media house would be providing everybody the data points about how year on year the EU's purchase of LNG, liquefied natural gas from Russia, has in fact increased, right? We have all of this data. If we have the data, how does Donald Trump not have the data? I mean, what do you make of it, Bill?
Well, I think a lot of people wonder about Trump's media diet. It's certainly possible that to some degree this entered his consciousness 2 weeks ago. But, this is classic Trump show. It's entertaining, it's bewildering, it's exciting. It's something. I mean, I found this speech to be somewhere between an airing of grievances and kind of one of those wedding toasts that goes on for way too long and no one knows what to do. What do we do with our hands? But I think another thing that we have to think about here is that when Trump communicates, he's not communicating like most people do, like certainly not like most politicians do. Most people are trying to communicate information. Generally speaking, I think that's not the case with Trump. He's a little bit more similar to a bat. So in terms of echolocation, right? He's putting out signals in every direction, and he wants to see what comes back. My sense is that with the European thing, it was a little bit humorous the way that he introduced it, but we should make no mistake, this was him turning up the pressure on Europe. And this is, he's been doing this over the last couple of weeks, but I would say this is kind of the most direct, specific call out to European allies that they need to stop purchasing energy from Russia, or that they at least need to reduce. And he pulled no punches. Again, on a relative basis, if we look at the arc of his attacks on consumers of Russian energy, it started entirely on India. It started to widen its aperture more and more. Now he's calling out China, and he's evidently calling out the European Union. So this is also a significant adjustment in his approach to the issue. So we can't discount that, even while the method of delivery is unexpected.
So can I just ask you briefly before I go to Chidanand and Stanley? He's making this whole point about the NATO countries funding the war alongside India and China, but he forgets to mention that his administration is taking a 10% markup in all weapons that are being provided to Europe. In other words, the real profiteer from this war are the Americans.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is not the sort of statistic that Trump generally likes to highlight. But it's true. I mean, the United States has arranged it in such a way that, the aid that we give to Ukraine also, comes back to us in a certain way. There's no question about that. But, he's, as we all know, he's very selective in what he surfaces and when. And it's hard to know, what's calculated and what's kind of just off the cuff, genuine.
Yeah. To that end, of course, the curious question would be that if his teleprompter actually failed with the UN disputed, how much of his speech was actually improvised or off the cuff? We have no idea. Do you share Ambassador Mohan Kumar's assessment that in a way, though he mentioned India, so there were two irritants from an Indian perspective. One was that you stand at the UN and then you claim that you have, once again you claim, I've lost count of how many times, that you ended the war between India and Pakistan. And doing it at the UN acquires a different sort of heft. And the second is, of course, targeting India for the purchase of Russian oil. Those were the two irritants. And then I don't know what India feels about the meeting the corridor meeting with Shehbaz Sharif, which lasted 36 seconds, the subsequent meeting with all of the Muslim world leaders, which he called his most important meeting. From an Indian perspective, what did you make of the speech?
I think India is still very marginal for him, although he keeps talking about the oil purchases. Actually, the real clip you should have played, Barkha, and I want to flag this. On Air Force One, he was actually asked by a journalist about the U.S. purchase of nuclear fuel from Russia.
Correct. I think we have that somewhere.
Yeah,
let me see if we can pull it out.
Last year. And he didn't know about it.
Yeah.
President of the United States he turned around to one of his cabinet officials, I think that Bergam or somebody, and said, "Do you know anything about this?" So the president of the United States doesn't know that the United States is still buying nuclear fuel from Russia. So effectively, the United States is also funding the war with Russia. But to come back to why this is happening, I mean, the speech, as journalists, we are supposed to be dispassionate and saying, and I've seen over the months, in the early days, journalists would write, President Trump is mercurial and quixotic and use, words like that. And then it became unhinged and untethered is what is being used now. And soon they'll be saying he's stark raving crazy, he's nuts. And it was so off the wall. I mean, I had to take a bunch of Tylenol, to get a grip. But here's the thing. The reason why all this is happening, from what I understand, is in the traditional format, presidents in the morning, they usually get the presidential daily brief, and then they are briefed by the principals, by people from the National Security Council, from the CIA, about all the things that are important, things that are happening in the world. And the way I understand it, that's not happening. Here's a president who wakes up and goes to Fox News first thing to get his diet, and there's a complete disconnect. And so very often he goes, he speaks, and there is no cohesion, there is no clarity, and most of the time he's just winging it. And so you saw this whole the UN speech was bookended by the Tylenol stuff that happened the evening before, and then later on he did a complete sort of reversal of the Russia-Ukraine story, and he now thinks Ukraine can actually take back not just the territory it's lost, but also take some Russian territory. So it was just incredible. And, India is just a small piece of this. I believe, his mind is all over the place. His attention span is, really negligible. So the way I understand it, it's just a jumble, and it reflected, so well in the speech, which was completely off the wall. It was so crazy that, both the escalator and the teleprompter stopped working.
So, sorry, I lost you briefly there, but you were valiantly holding the fort for us, Chidanand. Let me just ask you, were you more amused or troubled by Trump's speech, Chidanand?
No, troubled, really. I mean, the amusement part is, it's there. We can all laugh at it. I briefly thought that this is serious competition to Jimmy Kimmel, but seriously, you have to be concerned, beyond the amusement, beyond the jokes. Here's the president of the United States who has no clue what's happening, in various parts of the world. He doesn't know that the Europeans are buying fuel, energy from Russia. He doesn't know his own country, his own administration is buying nuclear fuel from Russia. I mean, this is serious stuff. And I think the time for amusement is over. And just the whole style, it crossed my mind that, by the way, I have never heard a president or any leader use the word deal so often. That's the only word he used. By the way, I can't recall when he's ever said an agreement. Countries don't make deals. They have agreements, they have treaties, they have pacts. Deal is what a real estate guy does, right? And it's disturbing that he sees everything in deal terms. It's transactional. And even at the UN, I mean, he's talking about how he should have won a 500 million contract, from the UN. So the idea, there's a blurring between personal and presidential here. And this is happening increasingly. It's all the time about him and his grievances. And this is really worrisome. I think, no, I'm not amused at all. Yeah, a few chuckles. But then I think this is just serious. He essentially, he just firebombed the UN, right? This was a verbal firebomb against the UN. The language that he used, you guys, your countries are going to hell. You'll all fail and stuff like that. So it's very interesting. One of the things he keeps claiming is that the United States is respected again in the world. I have not seen one survey which shows that the United States is respected. Actually, the last survey, the Pew Research survey, showed that across the world, the US is actually losing its standing. It's increasingly, it's probably feared, but respect, no. So you have a president who is completely untethered from reality. And it is disturbing.
Yeah. Let me bring in Stanley. I have a lot of questions for Ambassador Mohan Kumar because I know he's been a big believer in the capacity of the India-US relationship to recover, notwithstanding these hurdles. Does he still think that? But let me first get at Stanley. Stanley, this is your beat. From an Indian perspective, as I said, the Washington Post is reporting that there's that India may agree to reduce, not stop, but reduce the purchase of Russian oil, which was almost negligible, by the way, before the war started. But again, no independent or official corroboration of this. How are you looking at all the fault lines? We also have developments on the H-1B visa front. We have the lottery system set to end. We have now once again calls for the OPT, that's the training time that is given to foreign students, including many Indians who go on a visa, also under scrutiny. How are you looking at Trump at the UN?
Yeah, as you said, if you look at the statements came from the Indian leadership that they have always maintained that India will continue to trade with the countries, including Russia. In accordance with India's own economic interests, India won't change its trade and economic policies under pressure. But having said that, India has also maintained that it gives enormous importance to its bilateral relationship with the United States. So I've been arguing from the very beginning that I won't be surprised that if India reaches some kind of an agreement with the United States, not under duress, but as part of talks, some kind of an agreement with the United States so that it can cut back on some purchases from, not only in oil, not defense equipment, in terms of oil. And on the other side, if the United States is open to accept India's terms on the critical sectors, trade sectors here, including the dairy sector and agriculture sector, that still remains a possibility. But we don't know the facts about, how far we have progressed in trade talks between both sides. But we can't entirely rule out some kind of an agreement between the Indians and the Americans when it comes to these kind of issues. But at the same time, the potential, there are structural issues remaining in the relationship. Even if India agrees to reduce oil purchases from Russia, India's defense and strategic relationship with Russia will remain intact. Because when Trump came to office, before he came to office, his promise was that he will bring the war to an end and overnight. That's not going to happen. And now, if you look at the UN speech, Trump is saying that, okay, the Europeans are funding their own war. He makes fun of them. And he also says that if President Putin is not accepting any agreement, the Americans are going to impose more sanctions on Russia. And all countries gathered here will have to follow us or adopt the same measures, which means he is basically asking the Europeans to cut back their sales or impose sanctions, third-party sanctions on countries like India and China. As long as the war continues, these pressure points remain. And then secondly, and Trump,
Go ahead.
Trump himself realizes that it is not in his hands to bring the war to an end. That's why he is now turning up the pressure on the Europeans. This is also something like passing the baton, because
I think that's a really important point, because I think, Ambassador Kumar, if I may get you in on that note, Stanley, that's a really important point you flagged. Is that why he suddenly turned his attention to Gaza? Like, basically, Russia and Ukraine is what he thought he could bring home, not been able to bring home. So he's lashing out now, I think, as Stanley says, at the EU and a little bit at India and China. But his meeting today, which he called his most, not today, well, in the last few hours, that he called his most important meeting. The Pakistani Prime Minister, Erdogan, the Saudis, Qataris, with Gaza in mind, right? Why? I mean, has he run out of patience with Netanyahu? Is this now what he's hoping to? Is this the war he's now hoping to end? This is even tougher for him, given, Israel's sort of deep pockets of influence in the United States. What did you make of Trump's statement that his meeting with Muslim leaders, with Arab leaders, was his most important meeting? Ambassador.
So, Barkha, I may be entering a speculative realm here, but it is my sense that the national security strategy of the United States is going to be out in a couple of weeks or 3 weeks from now. My sense is that both the Middle East and Europe, the two theaters, US would like to retrench. The only doubt I have is Indo-Pacific, where I'm not sure what kind of policy he has in mind vis-a-vis China, which is the most important player in the Indo-Pacific. But leaving that aside, both the Middle East and Europe, it is my sense that the US wants to retrench or withdraw. Ukraine, he has already given an indication that he wants to do that by saying that Ukraine can get more land, or at least retrieve all the land. That's an extraordinary statement to make, given the fate on the battlefield that Ukraine has faced. So what he is doing, according to some experts, is he's basically saying, I'll give you some of the weapons, I'll do what I can, but it's your baby now. You do what you want. When I say you, he's talking of NATO and Europe. So that's one. In the Middle East, I think he's doing a bit of the same. He's basically telling the Muslim states or the Arab states that, listen, Israel has done what it has done. We believe that the recognition of the Palestinian state, which, by the way, is the main theme of the UN this year. Do not forget that that is the signature theme of this UN General Assembly. It is the recognition of the Palestinian state. And he says, I don't care. I think it's a reward for Hamas. And therefore, he is telling the Arab states, please try to manage the problem the best you can. So I really see this as US really trying to retrench and withdraw from the Middle Eastern theater and the European theater, trying to focus on its own Western hemisphere and a bit on the Indo-Pacific. I'm saying Indo-Pacific because of the strong statements made by Rubio. And today's news is that, you could have the Quad Summit reinstated. Maybe President Trump will make a trip to China first and then come to India later before the end of the year. I don't know. But so this is one theme that I think playing out. Behind the facade of all this amusement and exaggeration and so on, I tend to think President Trump is smart on some of these things. On H-1B, for example, he has caught the mood of the moment, Barkha. I don't think Indians will like it. That's a different issue. We have our gripe with it. But he's caught the mood of the moment, frankly, in MAGA. So he is able to hit the pulse of the average.
MAGA is saying he hasn't gone far enough. Steve Bannon is saying that Lutnick messed up. He basically made claims that aren't true. Go the whole hog. Shut it down.
So I'm just going to say this and let other panelists react maybe, but number one, he's hitting the pulse of the American people time and again. So we can laugh as much as we want, we can make fun, but do not underestimate President Trump. He is getting the pulse of the American people. He may not get all his facts, and I agree with that. So the second thing that I think all countries will now, I think, have to recalibrate their strategy vis-a-vis Trump. Trump will do and engage in public diplomacy, but if you do public diplomacy, you will pay a cost. That is what India has found. India could have done a lot of things privately by telling him that, listen, I think you did very well by putting pressure on Pakistan, etc., etc. But we chose to address the issue of mediation publicly in a phone call. And I believe we have paid a price. That's my personal view. I don't belong to the government anymore. So the countries will reformulate their strategy of dealing with President Trump. He's only 6-8 months he's been here. He's going to be here for the next 3 years and 4 months. Countries will have to deal with it. You don't deal with him by either confronting him publicly or by necessarily making indisputable facts in his face. You don't do that. There has to be another way of dealing with him. But that's my limited point, frankly, for today.
More questions of that as we go around the panel. Let me get in. Bill, do you agree with Ambassador's point that there is a method to his madness? He's not totally sort of out of sync with the mood of his people. But Bill, there's a problem with that formulation because, you know, on H-1B, for example, there was a claim made by the U.S. Commerce Secretary as he stood next to Donald Trump. And then basically the White House later had to clarify that many of those claims were not accurate. And for example, the $100,000 fee was a one-time fee, not for renewals, not every year, only for new applications. And Bannon went berserk. So, I mean, you know, Trump now has to walk this tightrope between the far right and the right, and also look out for the fact that there is an American business dimension here, right? So it's all very well to say Indians are taking American jobs, factually incorrect. But, you know, does America have the needed human resources for some of these jobs? Is this eventually going to be an own goal for Trump? I mean, how are you looking at this?
Well, I'll start by saying I think Ambassador Kumar is exactly correct. Does Trump have a kind of elaborate grand strategic vision? Probably not. But does he have instincts that are really effective at understanding what's going to grab attention, both of his supporters and of his detractors? That he is exceptional at. And, you know, we have to say at the end of the day, he's focused more human attention on himself than anyone else in history. So there's something to that. We can't underestimate that as a major accomplishment of some sort, even if it's not along the lines that we usually see politicians work, and it's not kind of a coherent policy plan. It's instincts that are really effective, really powerful at what they're trying to achieve, which is the show, the Trump show, and kind of a sense of his, you know, what he wants to get done in the moment. On the H-1B issue, you know, I think it's interesting that the rollout was so chaotic and so counterintuitive. I don't think it was planned, but, you know, one thing that a lot of people might intuitively think is actually the overstatement of it in its initial form was politically effective insofar as it really surfaced these issues, right? And there is a movement on the new right that is very skeptical of importing even high-skilled workers. They're going to have to, but I mean, I think you're right. Basically, when you look at the issue of scale, when you look at the kind of STEM PhD numbers coming out of China and all these sorts of things, there's no question that we need global talent to compete, and we need India in particular. I think that, you know, this move really is based on an impulse of his base towards, you know, the incredibly successful Indian American minority that has really taken America by storm in recent years. But it's not exactly a strategic move. And I think, you know, with Trump, he's very happy to take wild and quick policy swings in different directions. So I doubt we've seen the end of the story here, but we have seen a major development that Indian Americans, that, you know, tech companies, that everyone's going to have to reckon with in terms of how we move forward.
Yeah. Chidanand, you want to come in on that? The instinct that both Ambassador Kumar and Bill speak about, I think it's true. I mean, he's obviously not doing this without any reason. He's got some reason, right? And he's kind of testing the waters in real time. And he doesn't really care about consistency. But from an Indian American perspective, by the way, key Indian American people, the great achievers in the world of technology, are absolutely silent. I mean, if anything, the fact that, this idea that the diaspora would wield soft power, that, India was well served by investing a great amount of political capital in them, I'm not sure anymore, because maybe they need to protect their own interests, but they've been silent. They've been absolutely silent.
Absolutely.
So what's the mood in the community?
Well, yes, I think that's actually very conspicuous silence there. I can think of two reasons. One is, of course, and this has been evident for some time, that Indian Americans, as they become wealthier, tend to gravitate towards the Republican Party. Anybody who goes up beyond 400,000, 500,000, they want to preserve their money. They're interested in tax cuts and so on. So there's the economic angle. The other thing is, I think there is fear. They don't want to take on the administration. They don't want to take on the president. I mean, look, there are Indian Americans heading, two of the top 5, Fortune 500 companies, Google and Microsoft. Yeah. And they have enormous, business interests, and the administration and the president, the White House, has leverage, right? And eventually, the CEOs are responsible for, the bottom line profits, their board, shareholders, and so on. So nobody wants to hurt that business. And I think President Trump has shown very effectively that he has leverage, and he will use that leverage against big companies and big corporations. So there's genuine fear, and I mean, right now, for instance, Google, the administration can really finger the parent company, Alphabet. I sense a reluctance to speak out. In fact, a lot of Indian American CEOs have trooped into the White House along with the rest of the tech bros, to sing, praises of the president. So the sense I get is a lot of Indian Americans just want to lie low and, hope that, this will pass.
Yeah.
You have a president who is very openly and transparently vengeful. He's very transparent. The one thing you have to credit President Trump is he doesn't hide anything. He's just out there and he tells you openly. I mean, I see just now that he's already threatening, Jimmy Kimmel and ABC. He's brought back Jimmy Kimmel and he's saying, "Oh, we're going to test this out, and I'm going to get, go after them and get more money out of them because they had settled earlier." So he can be very, very vengeful and very open about it. So a lot of people are fearful, and I don't think Indian American community is particularly
and fair, because if why put all the pressure on the Indian Americans? You had Mark Zuckerberg, for example, completely reverse policies at Meta ever since the Trump inauguration. Stanley, I'm more curious about where you think the agreement points can be. I mean, I think you're saying it's not all over despite all of this. There are going to be points of convergence. I think one thing is that any government in this environment will have to keep domestic political mood in mind. Given how publicly Trump plays out everything, to be seen now agreeing to things that you may have quietly agreed to 6 months ago that nobody would have noticed has a political cost.
Yeah, my point is that both sides, I mean, despite Trump's attacks on, or people like Peter Navarro, despite their public attacks on India, there is still emphasis given on the bilateral relationship by both sides, both India and the United States. And India and the United States stay engaged in talks, so they will continue to explore the opportunities to reach some kind of an agreement on the disputed trade terms. Well, my point is that still remains a possibility. So India, if you have to make a deal with the United States, and even at the cost of cutting down on Russian oil purchases, I believe that India might be open to doing that. But India will not be ready to open up its agricultural and dairy sector to make concessions on that. Those are the critical areas as regards Indian economy is concerned, which the Prime Minister himself has said publicly that he won't make concessions on those areas. So that is something I think the question is whether the Indians and the Americans will reach some common ground in between. So it is. This is, I mean, a deal, I think, is still possibility. But at the same time, I would say that overall, the experience India had over the last few weeks, that will cast a long shadow over the lasting strategic cooperation between the United States and India, or the kind of strategic cooperation both the Indians and the Americans had imagined over the past 20 to 30 years. So the last few weeks' experience have cast a long shadow over that. So the Indians would like to have some kind of stability in their relationship, wanted to continue their economic and strategic relationship with the United States, but not at the cost of its strategic autonomy, or not at the cost of its overall relationship with other countries. So that, I think, if anything, this experience has strengthened India's resolve to pursue its multiple foreign policy options. Please.
Just briefly, Ambassador Kumar, because then I want to spend the last 5 minutes talking about what's happening with the Muslim countries and in particular with Pakistan. Do you still believe a deal is possible in the way that Stanley thinks? Do you agree with him that India might agree to reduce the amount of oil that India is purchasing from Russia, or in today's environment will be very difficult politically for India to do so?
I completely agree with Mr. Stanley John. That I think I see the deal as being extremely imminent, actually. This week, Piyush Goyal being in Washington, D.C., that it was never about the trade deal. We were so close. I've been saying this, 99% of it was done. I believe that we will now have to make some commitments about substantial energy purchases from the United States. And that is what we will do, in my view, to bring the deal to fruition. Apart from that, as far as Pakistan and the Arab world is concerned, Barkha, I think we have to stop hyphenating ourselves with Pakistan, frankly. It is abundantly clear to me that Pakistan serves some strategic value to the US, and that has to be found in the AfPak region. And in order to deal with the situation there, he wants Bagram base, etc. And Afghanistan has made some statements. So there is a strategic value that Pakistan serves to the US, as long as it doesn't impinge on your fundamental security interests. I think you just have to accept that, frankly. But beyond that, my conclusion to this whole thing is that Trump is once in a lifetime president. He is sui generis. There is no strategy to deal with him unless you are like China and you possess leverage. If you possess leverage, you can deal with him. For everybody else, it's got to be you make things as you go along, strategic patience, flexibility, and so on. Frankly, this is the only rule book that you can have. You cannot have a rule book vis-a-vis a president who is so mercurial and unpredictable.
Okay, before we get last comments, you say, Ambassador, that we should stop hyphenating ourselves with Pakistan, and I agree, but the Americans might be doing that for us with an envoy who is also going to be the envoy for all of South and Central Asia. India did take a very strong, made a very strong comment at the UN about Pakistan, this after strikes on the civilian population in the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa area, where women and children are among those who have been killed. I'm just going to play out that statement and then we'll come to last comments.
Mr. Vice President, a delegation that epitomizes the antithesis of this approach continues to abuse this forum with baseless and provocative statements against India. Instead of coveting our territory, they would do well to vacate the Indian territory under the illegal occupation and focus on rescuing an economy on life support, a polity muzzled by military dominance, and a human rights record stained by persecution. Perhaps once they find time away from exporting terrorism, harboring UN-proscribed terrorists, and bombing their own people. I thank you.
Okay, last comments. I'll start with you, Stanley, then Chidanand, Bill, and I'll end with the ambassador. You know, India has been somewhat concerned about, you know, what ambassador calls, maybe there is some strategic value or tactical value that Pakistan holds for America. It won't be the first time. It won't be the last time. How concerned should India be with the Sergio Gore announcement, given that he's going to represent the wider region as well?
Yeah, the Trump administration has clearly made it clear that, I mean, it's true. I agree with Ambassador that India should stop hyphenating ourselves with Pakistan, but the Americans, I mean, they have signaled that they want to hyphenate India and Pakistan, especially after Trump came to power, after the Operation Sindhu. If you look at the statements, there is a connect between all the statements President Trump was making. His comment that he brought the war to an end, and the comments by the Trump administration officials about about the United States playing a role in bringing peace and stability to South Asia, bringing peace between India and Pakistan, and the way the United States is warming up to Pakistan. There is a sudden warm up to Pakistan, which I am still trying to understand the underlying reasons, because Trump hosts the Pakistani military general, Pakistani prime minister is meeting Trump now, and Pakistan has, just last week we saw a mutual defense agreement between Pakistan and Saudi Arabia. Both are very close allies of the United States. And this happened. Trump hosted the Pakistani military general just a couple of days before Israel bombed Iran, which is a Pakistani neighbor. And Trump is also now saying that Trump wants the Bagram Air Base back. And if Trump is planning to do something or anything, we don't know. And Pakistan holds the key, because we know that throughout the 1990s, after Pakistan lost its strategic value, in the early 2000s, Pakistan regained it in the eyes of the Americans after the September 11 attack. So Afghanistan, the whole Afghan war had reshaped Pakistan's relevance, or brought Pakistan back to the primary strategic thinking in Washington. So what you are again witnessing is that the United States is suddenly warming up to Pakistan, and Pakistan is getting greater relevance. So we are still trying to figure out what are the underlying reasons, what the Americans are up to in the region.
Yeah,
so
and
I
it
think
could
the
be
Indians.
Please. Sorry. Take your last sentence. And the Indians.
My point is that yes, the Indians should be a bit concerned, but rather the Indians should also get the correct facts, understand what role Pakistan is going to play in West Asia or in South Asia, or what role the United States is going to play in Afghanistan or Iran or in the larger region.
Yeah. So, Chidanand, where does this obsession with the Bagram base square with sort of, we're only going to focus on our own backyard? There's a lot of Trump's doctrine that is absolutely contradictory. If we were to talk about Pakistan and what's happening with Pakistan, what's happening with this meeting that he calls the most important meeting, which includes the Pakistan Prime Minister, what is happening here? Please do note that Shehbaz Sharif in his speech once again flatters Trump. So you're seeing a kind of combination of Pakistan's tactical value, Pakistan's flattery of Trump, Pakistan's business dealings with Trump's family, maybe all one heady cocktail, maybe not any one factor. How do you see it?
Yeah, but I'm a little amused when people try and divine some strategic coherence in this whole policy. I mean, frankly, the United States is now a business enterprise. It's not so much a country, right? And this is a businessman who is transactional. He's very open. He's very transparent about it. And I find it hard to, why people don't see it, because he's very open about this. His favorite words are billions and trillions. And you can actually see a pattern. Any country which comes, to the White House, any leader in the Oval Office, the moment he mentions 500 billion, that's it. They're the winners. And a lot of countries have figured that out, whether it's in the Middle East, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, South Korea, Japan, all of them, billions and trillions. And he loves to go and say that, the United States, we have got 17 trillion in investment. I mean, I don't know where he pulled that figure out of, and we have never seen any, details of this. And his spokeswoman says 9 trillion. So they just throw around these figures. Really, this is all about, business interests. And he's said time and again, it's not just make America great again, make America rich again. The number of times he's used the word rich, we are rich, we'll be rich again, we are the richest country on earth. So it doesn't matter whether it's Ukraine or Russia, he'll throw anybody under the bus. So to sit and say, he's going to do this in Gaza and no, this whole meeting, it's about, show me the money. That line from the movie, I think Jerry Maguire, show me the money, right? And that is it. Even with
Yeah.
Ukraine, I mean, can you believe it? He was so open and so transparent, and he said, okay, I can't stop the war, but guess what? We're going to make money out of the war. We're making money out of the war.
Yeah. Yeah.
So to try and say, oh, this grand Indo-Pacific strategy and Russia and nah, show me the money. That's the bottom line.
Yeah,
And he's
but
very open about it. So, and money not just for himself or his family. I think, even the United States.
But there are serious economic issues in America which you have flagged, right? With the corn and soybean farmers, with the job situation.
Yeah.
So he's not just it's not just other countries who have to show him the money. He's got to show the money to the American people.
Absolutely, and he says I'm going to use all this, even with respect to the H-1B fee, the visa fees. He says we're going to make some other gold card and the platinum card.
Yeah.
They have come up with these fantastic numbers, and he says I'm going to use this to cut down the debt, give tax breaks. So he's very, very transparent, and you can say cynical about the way that money matters. That this is what I owe the American people.
Yeah.
I need to get them out of debt, and if it means sacrificing Ukraine today or Russia tomorrow, or
so be it.
And even in terms of NATO, I mean, he's very clear that I'm going to sell NATO weapons, and they can give it to Ukraine.
Yeah.
So everything is transactional.
Yeah, and I think the question.
And here we are sitting and saying, "Oh, is there a grand design?" Marco Rubio can say what he wants. I mean, I feel sorry because Trump used to call him Little Marco. Remember during the campaign, and here he is trying to say, "Yeah, we are still into Indo-Pacific." Trump has never said that, right? And the reason you haven't seen a national security strategy, document or doctrine is they're still sitting around wondering, what do we say? Because you have a president who could, tear it up publicly and say, I don't like this.
That's a great point. So, Bill, help us here. I mean, does it matter what the Pentagon actually releases as the new doctrine if, as has been pointed out, Trump can improvise on it at any point? Bill?
I think it matters less than it ordinarily would. I think we can say that for sure. I think an initial thing is, this administration is a lot less coordinated in its policy than most administrations were used to. The National Security Council, which is the usual coordination body, has basically been gutted and not rebuilt. So we see a lot of kind of deputies, this kind of second layer down from Trump or third layer down, who feel empowered to be kind of entrepreneurial in what the approach they're going to take. But at the end of the day, it all comes back to Trump, and he'll set the agenda. But I want to point out two quick things too, though. On the Pakistan issue, one other factor here that I think is worth mentioning is that, Trump's approach to foreign policy in general is that he basically learns the lessons that American foreign policy has already learned himself. And we saw this in the first administration. He started with a lot of kind of further out there ideas, and as he tested the system tested him back, and then he ended up drifting closer and closer towards conventional American foreign policy. He seems to be doing that again. He had these ideas that he was going to be able to fix things with Russia. He got burned, and now, again, he's drifting closer and closer towards where the American foreign policy consensus has been. I think the same thing's going to happen with Pakistan. Pakistan's very good at kind of reading what Trump wants. You got to hand it to them for that they've been able to kind of appeal to him in a certain way. But Pakistan's also really good at over-promising and under-delivering. And that's going to happen again. And similarly, slowly, he's going to realize how important the United States is. How important India is to the United States. And I further think that actually Sergio Gore being dual-hatted as ambassador to India and with this kind of broader mandate for the whole region is a great thing for two reasons. For Indian interests, I'll say. One is that Sergio Gore has close personal relations with Trump, and that's always a good thing in this administration. And second of all, that means that Trump is more likely to hear about the entire region first from an Indian perspective, right? And that's what, in a sense, there's been this concern that it's rehyphenating. I actually think it's the opposite. We're more likely to get a more India-informed foreign policy on South Asia more generally because we have this dual appointment with a close confidant of President Trump.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point that maybe the perspective will be an India first or an India-shaped perspective. So those who are, and many of us are concerned about Gore's sort of, double-hatted appointment. You're saying it could work to India's advantage. Ambassador Dr. Mohan Kumar, the last word to you. You say a deal is imminent. What would be the value of a deal in this environment with the president, whom, as Chidanand points out, can overturn it, upend it at any moment, though it is also important what Bill says, that he experiments, but then he comes back somewhere to the American conventional consensus.
No, you're right in the sense that nothing is cast in stone with the president, but I haven't seen him reverse tariffs. So once all these Southeast Asian countries and other countries have been given a particular tariff, I think he has largely stuck to it. Even with South Korea and Japan, they've had some disagreements on investments, but the tariff level has stayed the same. For India, that is important because business operators need the security and predictability to do business. So that's all I'm saying. And I think I still maintain there will be a deal. In terms of future, if you see the trajectory, Barkha, of India-US relations, actually the relationship is better today than it was 3 months ago. So there's something which we are doing right, which is, I would therefore say India has to stay the course, be self-confident, and not give in when your vital interests are threatened. That President Trump gets, I think, in a very strange sort of way. He will get it. So there is no point in trying to sacrifice your vital interests. Everything else, by all means, go ahead and strike a compromise. So that would be my recipe, frankly.
Okay, we leave it there. I think, as you pointed out, Ambassador Kumar, and we can all agree on that being the bottom line, conventional diplomacy or conventional ways of understanding foreign policy are not going to work. And neither is rebutting Donald Trump on facts, nor is disagreeing with him on public. And I think every country is going to have to forge their own path here. Some have surrendered with flattery, others have held their counsel. I would say India falls into the second category, where India is more or less, as far as we know, there's been no sort of giving in to anything that constitutes a red line. And, though a lot of people had said, India's diplomats are too old-fashioned, this is a president who conducts his foreign policy on social media. It turns out, with the benefit of hindsight, that keeping calm and carrying on the old-fashioned way has actually helped India. That's what I would say. Of course, never say never, and you have no idea what's going to happen with this president. We'll have all of you back when and if there are more surprises in store. Thank you so much, gentlemen, to Bill Drexel, to Chidanand Rajghatta, Stanley Johny, and Ambassador Dr. Mohan Kumar. Always a pleasure. Take care. See you soon.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Motor's Story and support independent, robust journalism.